just people, and we're glad to be alive.
Welcome to We're People First, the Jeff Moyer Show. Here's Christy Moyer.
Well, hello everybody, and I'm sitting here beside Jeff. As you can see, he is ready to go with his instruments. But before I let him do that, we're back in his studio. He's surrounded by his beloved musical instruments, and he has on a very deep purple shirt with a black and gray striped bow tie, and I have on a lace jacket and a navy blue dress and a necklace that my son and my wonderful daughter-in-law gave me for Mother's Day. And I'm kind of in red, white, and blue because we're going to have a little reflection on Memorial Day. But before we get on into that, I want to say thank you. Thank you, thank you. We are so grateful for so many people. Bill Malin, our producer. We have had over 5,000 views last show. We're so grateful for that. And
all of you, everyone's watching and
we
sharing.
Want to thank all of our past guests. We've had some wonderful guests, and we have a wonderful guest today. Shouting out their names, we had Sarah and Phil Taylor, Margarita, Alessandro, Diana,
Pastora Carson,
and
Marnette Hatchett.
Marnette Hatchett. I can't read my own writing, my gosh.
You said Philip and Sarah Taylor.
I did say that, yes. Yeah. And I want to say a shout out to a wonderful little boy that gave me this beautiful bracelet for Mother's Day. We were having dinner, and beside us, the social distance thing, there was a little guy there with his grandmother and mother, and he came over after our meal, and he said, I want to give you a Mother's Day gift.
Joseph.
And his name was Joseph. He said, and I believe it was second grader, wasn't he?
Yes, 7 years old.
Yes, and he was just lovely.
Out of the clear blue.
Yeah, just walked up and said, I want to give you a Mother's Day gift. So thank you, Joseph.
And we spoke to his mother and grandmother, and it was just a delight to be with that little family for a moment.
Oh, it sure was. Excuse me, I have some allergies or something going on.
Want to sip of my throat tea?
I'm good, thank you. So let's see. So we're going to change the way the show's going to flow a little bit this time, because Jeff's going to start us off with a song that is in memorial for his great uncle, Bill, who lost his life in a military camp that he was attending. And so I'll let Jeff tell you more about that. But the name of the song is Lewisburg.
Great-grandfather was a baker. He lived in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He drove a horse and wagon, fresh bakery to your door. The oven fires were burning there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, baking through the night, gone and back by morning light. But the horse knew his way home when great-grandfather sat alone. Great-grandfather had 6 children there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He loved them all as fathers do. Bill was his firstborn son. The oven fires were burning there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Great-grandfather brimmed with pride, young Bill worked by his side. But the horse knew his way home when great-grandfather sat alone. Bill knew the world was changing there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He felt an inner stirring and he heard a distant call. But his letters told the story of his hardship and his glory by the oven fires at night, great-grandfather's delight. Great-grandfather read the telegram there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He read it over slowly, then he read it once again. Great-grandfather in the morning there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. The shocking news was read, pneumonia, Bill was dead. Great-grandfather sat alone. Bill returned with honors there to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. They folded up the flag and they laid him in the ground. Great-grandfather lived to be an old man there in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Something gone inside from the day Bill had died. But the horse knew his way home.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. That was wonderful. Tell us about that story. Tell us about how you wrote the song and why.
I will, but let me get untangled first.
Okay.
I can't talk or let alone sing with this harmonica.
Let me help you.
I'll take your help with great gratitude. This is the stuff you're supposed not to see. Thank you, baby.
Just a minute. I lost my phone. Okay. All right.
That was a family story that rang down through the ages. I can still remember my grandmother telling us with great sadness about her brother Bill, who died so young, and he was in the military. That's all that she said about it. We went to the Lewisburg, Pennsylvania cemetery on one of our travels, and we put stones on my great-grandmother's and my great-grandfather's graves, and Uncle Bill's grave, and we read his dates. He died in 1920. After the pandemic started, I began thinking about that story. I knew he died of pneumonia. I knew he was in the military, and I knew it was 1920. And then my sister Bonnie turned on her genealogical detective laser focus, and we learned this: that he was in the National Guard, that he lived in Maryland, that he had 3 children, that he was 27 years old. I've learned from my readings that the average age, or the mean age, of those who succumbed to the pandemic from between 1918 and 1920 were 27 years old.
What was the name of that pandemic?
Well, it was called the Spanish flu pandemic, but that's actually a misnomer. It was actually the American flu pandemic. It began in the United States, but our government clamped down any reporting about it. So there was no news about it. And it would run rampant through military camps. So we took it, our military force took it to the rest of the world during the First World War, and it spread from there. Spain was the only country that allowed a free press to talk about it. So although it was called the Spanish flu, because news came out of Spain, rightfully it should have been called the American flu. And I read one account that said that if you caught that flu, it could kill you in 24 hours. And that it was a report of a doctor who talked about walking through barracks with all of the men who had died laid out on their bunks, like they were sleeping, all of them gone. So my guess is that Uncle Bill went to his National Guard responsibility in a summer camp, contracted pneumonia. They would say the cause of death was pneumonia, and that was the cause of death, where in fact he probably died of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. You know, the thing about Memorial Day is we raise up the memory of those who've died serving in the military because their death had meaning and purpose. But for any family who's lost a child, for that matter, for any family who has lost any member because of COVID or because of any reason, it leaves the same hole in the family. And it does ring down through generations, like my own story of my Uncle Bill.
Yes.
Don't you think?
I do think that, yes. And, you know, we should honor our own relatives. I know you have relatives that are still in active service. My dad, his brother, my uncle, my mother's brother, my other uncle on the other side, they were all in the military.
Of course, your family just came to this country 2 generations ago.
Correct, but your family, tell us about...
Well, my family's been around for a long time. The first record of anyone coming is 1590 that I know of. But we had 7 members fight in the Revolutionary War, 13 in the Civil War on both sides. There were several deaths and disability from the Civil War. Uncle Bill in the First World War generation, and then at the landing at D-Day, my Uncle Coy died as an Army radio operator. So, and currently my cousin Kenny's son Matthew and Kenny's other son-in-law, I'm sorry, I forget his name, are currently in the military. So we have
you have quite
quite a long military history. Yeah,
absolutely.
We sure do. But for all families who have lost anyone in the military, and for all families who have lost anyone in COVID, we send our deepest empathy and condolence.
Thank you very much. That's great. Now, I'm trying to think what we else have left out. I know you've got a cousin Scott, right?
In my generation, absolutely. Yes. Scott and Wayne both served, and my cousin Kim's husband Jerry served.
And you have a godson, don't you? That's
my godson absolutely is a commander in the Navy.
And Jeff probably won't want to tell you this, but he tried to enlist when he was 18, and he had lost a lot of vision by then. He never has driven a car.
Yeah.
But he went down to, was it the Navy?
Well, I called him on the phone and I said I'd like to enlist, and we got through the preliminaries. My dad and uncle were both Navy corpsmen, and I thought I might serve in that role or in some capacity, but I was told once he learned that I was legally blind, he said that there was no way that I could. I said, well, I'll peel potatoes. But they weren't
too thrilled about that, were they? Well, again, you have found a way to serve so many people in other ways, and I think what you consider your major contribution, like instead of military service, is you donated your kidney to your best friend's daughter. So you're a hero in some ways too.
Thank you, honey. Okay. Well, I think that what we're going to do next is address people first consciousness.
People first consciousness.
So tell us how this is going to go. Again, it's a little departure from what we've done before. What's going to happen first?
Well, let's talk about what the theme is for the day, which is mental health and mental illness. Then I'm going to read a section from my book, Grit, and then we'll introduce our guest.
Oh, yes, our wonderful guest that is from Boulder, Colorado, Dr. Ron Bassman. And I'll let Jeff introduce him a little later. But right now, you're going to start with your readings?
Well, no, I think we should start by talking about the basic topic of mental health and mental illness. You know, when we think about disability, by the way, are you in the frame?
No.
Okay, so I can slide over. I can relax. Okay.
Yeah, relax.
Move over. Disability is as broad as it is deep. And the National Institute of Health says that 1 out of 5 Americans, and we hope that people in other countries are watching this show, but because we live in the United States, we're somewhat American-centric. 1 out of 5 people in the United States has a mental illness, according to the National Institutes of Health. And there are 14 symptoms, but they include depression, anxiety and fear, and inability to concentrate. So all of us are responsible for our mental health in that we need to express our feelings appropriately. And when we feel that we have hit a rough patch that we need help with, that we're stuck concerning our mood, our emotion, or our thinking, we need to ask for help. And with COVID, one of the things that is a symptom is isolating. And COVID, of course, has caused all of us to isolate in ways that we don't want. So it has compounded the problem, especially for children who are so often not so often, all children need social interaction. Kids with disabilities suffer primarily because of lack of social interaction. And the social isolation created by COVID has compounded the problems for kids with disabilities, all children, and all of us. If you listen to podcasts, you constantly hear advertisements for counseling programs, and it certainly is a time for full employment for licensed professional counselors, as I once was. It's a good time for any of us to think about our mental health. And I think that people with the best mental health are those who seek assistance most readily.
Well,
Your family, however.
Well, just a moment before I go on to that.
Yeah.
Just this last week, was it, when the tennis player, she withdrew from the French Open, was it?
Because of depression, right?
And she was able to admit that and take actions for her own good well-being. So that's courage.
Yes, although the consequences for her were not positive.
Well, we don't know the end story to that yet. So
I must say I'm not fully versed on it either. Are you?
Well, it's just I think an indication. I think the younger generation is more willing to come forward and ask for help. For instance, in my family, I heard of mental illness in kind of a child listening to adults talk. Nobody actually talked directly to me as a child, but right. I understand that my grandfather, my mother's father, had what they called a nervous breakdown. I never knew what that really meant, but he did go through electroshock, and his daughter, my aunt, had mental illness episodes throughout her life. She was in and out of mental institutions, and her son, my cousin, has been diagnosed as schizophrenic. So, my family has definitely been touched with it. but we weren't just, it was not discussed. We were not openly able to talk about any of that. And I hope, and I do think it is changing. So that's my family.
I think you're right. And, what Ron Bassman is going to teach us all is about terms like psychiatric episode, the whole idea of a psychiatric disability. But what I want to talk about for a moment is normalcy, how we see who is normal and who we see as different from the norm. And typically those people are isolated, they're segregated, they're swept out of mainstream, whatever it is. And then we say, it's us and them. They are the other. And we devalue them because of their difference. So when I was working in schools, and all the materials I've developed deal with disability in the context of diversity, in the context of being devalued. And certainly people who have the label of mental illness are devalued and the source of great ridicule and
well, I just wanted to say that I think Dr. Bassman is going to talk about something like you put labels on jars, not on people.
Well, let's not steal
all
of his thunder.
But let's get on now with your readings.
Yeah, I want to also say that in my family, both my cousin and my aunt died of suicide. So my family certainly also has been touched deeply. I want to read something from my book about my brother's circumstances. My brother was seen as a scary guy. He was a dangerous guy. He was one of those who you dare not mess with because he spent 33 years in institutions that were like prisons, that were violent places. And he learned violence. He learned to be violent to protect himself. And he also developed what's called institutionalized mental illness. Here we go. So, institutionalized mental illness. Come on, computer, start reading. As I said, Mark was a dangerous, scary man, yet also a gentle, generous one. Not long after a meeting about Mark acted out the worst mayhem against his physical surroundings yet. He knocked over or threw every piece of furniture in his path, and then body slammed himself against a large bay window. The window's glass and frame shattered, and my brother jumped out of the jagged opening onto the house's front porch. Then he was off the porch and running down the busy city street. Like his frantic escape attempt from the barbaric Columbus State Institution for the Mentally Retarded 25 years earlier, police apprehended him. This time, he was taken to the nearby Cleveland Psychiatric Institute for a 10-day evaluation. I was called. I wondered at the incongruous fate that had opened the door of seeming opportunity for Mark, which I had created by getting him transferred into an 8-bed group home, which was the West 14th Street house, only to shove him headlong into the sickening spiral of unintended consequences. He was held in Cleveland's dismal public psychiatric hospital. While at Berkeley decades before, I had read an article about the backgrounds of people who found themselves in psychiatric institutions. The one factor that they all had in common was that they had come from living circumstances within which they were never alone, and they could not get away from other people. Mark had lived in crowded, dysfunctional settings for 32 years, and in the professional jargon of the day, I was told Mark had developed institutionalized mental illness. He was locked in a bleak, crowded, sterile ward in a large psychiatric institution. No one else in the ward seemed to have any cognitive disability whatsoever. Mark was adrift and quite out of place. My wife and I visited every afternoon. We would take giant bags of popcorn and my guitar. Everyone would gather around in the one common room with its prison screen on the windows and its metal chairs bolted to the floor. I would start playing and we would have a spontaneous party. The residents and staff gathered around and even danced. I recall a white-coated psychiatric nurse dancing with several of the men under her care. The nightly popcorn was a hit, and the place took on an air of near normalcy with music and laughter. After 4 evenings of our popcorn parties, on the 5th evening, the front desk guard told us that he had been told that the popcorn was banned. The bag of popcorn went back into the car. With its absence, the parties lost their appeal. Again, the white-coated woman was back in her office with the door closed, and most of the patients wandered the blank hallways mumbling to themselves. Mark was held at the Cleveland Psychiatric Institute twice, following violent outbursts. Both times, he was contrite and confused. Mark knew that he had done something wrong and would apologize and repeat what he was told to say about how to behave. After the observation periods, he would be sent back into the toxic confines of the West 14th Street house, where Vicky would again begin dropping her poison pellets into Mark's dormant acid. The explosive reaction would be tripped, and he would again act out violently. Now, after the second such episode, Mark was removed and under guard. 3 people on 1 person in an apartment. And I was told, you have to find someplace else for Mark to live. Well, I scrambled in the 2 places I found. I was told that people like Mark weren't welcomed. I was going to rent houses for him. So he went into a place that the county controlled, in dismal places with rats and the toilets overflowing and the roof leaking, because actually it was a Catholic group of brothers that owned it, and they were going to tear the place down as soon as Mark left, so they didn't bother fixing it. After a time, I said, let me find a place close to me. They said, go ahead. For the first time, I was given carte blanche, and I did find a place within walking distance. This is another segment of the memoir. Twice Mark aggressed against another resident who had been slapping him and others regularly. I often said that if I was ever in a bar fight, I would want my brother on my side. After the second beating Mark delivered, he was removed, and it was then I was told that if he continued to act violently, he would be sent back to an institution where his behavior could be controlled. I again intervened and was given the opportunity to find Mark a home in my community. I did. I found a small ranch house, took the owner to federal court after he refused to rent to us, and won. I furnished the house and Mark moved in. Edgewood. Moving day arrived, and a very jubilant Mark moved in. A glorious, happy day. He selected the master bedroom with windows looking onto the wooded backyard, his own personal quiet forest. After 33 bitter years, Mark was moving into a serene, wonderfully normal house in my neighborhood. I could easily walk to see him. I delighted in dropping by and savoring the privacy and dignity that Mark had in the little house. The impossible had come true. On Edgewood, Mark finally had a home of his own, a place where he could enjoy the simple gifts of a calm and normal community life. Mark thrived and blossomed as never before. Gone were the explosive acts towards people and property. Gone were the yelling and cussing. Mark could be by himself, close his bedroom door, turn on his television or radio, or both.
That's just wonderful. Thank you. And those were right out of your book, correct?
Yeah, that's out of Grit, a family memoir on adversity and triumph, available in ebook or paperback from my website, jeffmoyer.com.
I do have to say, I didn't know Mark at the times that Jeff described. When I met Mark, he was just a wonderful man, so loving, so kind. And when you told me these stories before, it was hard for me to believe that he had those episodes in his life. I'm so glad that he was able to live more normally.
But the magic was, it's not magic, it was the human circumstance was that take any individual out of violent places and they no longer need to be violent. Mm-hmm. So for Mark, instantly, that was the end of that period. Absolutely, period.
Wonderful.
So, okay, well, there's so much more to say, but we have a guest who's going to teach all of us a great deal in the short time we have his time. So I'm going to lean back and we're going to get ready for Dr. Ron Bassman.
Guest interview.
We're waiting for Ron to join us, but while we're waiting, why don't you give him a little introduction?
I will. Ron and I worked together at several junctures when we were living in Colorado, and I met this man who is a licensed psychologist and a world leader, the man, concerning how we define how we all should be thinking about what we term mental illness. Ron is a psychiatric survivor, and I'll let him tell those stories. But Ron Bassman is a great teacher, and we're very fortunate to have his time today. Ron is one of the most humble and self-effacing and gentle voices in the disability rights movement. And I will also say that in the disability rights movement, people with psychiatric disabilities or mental health disabilities have been the last to be welcomed into the fold. So we are a coalition, but of people with many disabilities, and as we look around and see each other, finally, we're seeing everyone in the human family. And Ron has a book he's going to tell us about, and he has many articles online. There's one which all of you can access and read called Mad in America. And Ron talks about madness as something that all of us have the potential for. Not primitive, but in simpler communities, people who see visions or hear voices are venerated, often deemed shamans, and people who have significant power that the rest of us lack to be plugged in to aspects of reality that the rest of us might miss. So I know in my own life circumstance, there was a time in my youth for 2.5 years I was prisoner in a cult, if you will. And during that time, the woman who ran the show convinced me that I was an energy vampire, that I was actually killing kittens with my energy violence. And I didn't believe that was true. But like any cult, when you control the person's experience and everything about what they go through, it's easy to fall into belief. And is Ron here?
He just popped in.
Good. Well, I'll just say I smashed my own hands with rocks, wanting to punish myself and shock myself out of whatever was wrong with me. And for that time, I was in madness. Ron, welcome.
I think you're muted.
Okay, yeah, we're not hearing you, Ron. There we wanting to punish myself and shock myself out of whatever was wrong with it. And for that time, I was in madness. Ron, welcome.
Thank you. I enjoyed listening to you and some of the things.
Okay, yeah, we're not hearing you, Ron. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you,
That's
Ron.
better.
Okay. What I was saying was I really enjoyed listening to you. You're singing, as I've always have whenever I've seen you. And thank you.
Oh, Ron, I know what's happening. You have your YouTube on. We're hearing that.
Okay.
A 20-second delay.
Okay.
I think that's better.
Yes, we can hear you, Ron.
What I was saying was I really enjoyed listening to you. You're singing, as I've always have whenever I've
Yeah, we just need to
and,
turn off the volume on the YouTube, and then we'll be set. There, that sounds right.
We can see you, Ron, but we can't hear you.
I don't think he's.
Okay.
Now we're good. Now we're good.
Okay. All I can see right now is you, Jeff. I don't need to see my face, so I'm fine. Something I'm not doing correctly.
Is your video turned on?
Yeah. That's okay. Let's not just cause a delay. What I was starting to say, Jeff, was always I'm impressed by your generous spirit, how you've lived your life, and the meaning it's given to you and others in all that you've done. I was also I joined with you very much in looking at isolation. It's the key issue for people. I mean, the lack of integration for people, the institutionalization of people prevents them from moving on with their life. They get stuck in a place, whether it's mental illness or, I don't even like to call it mental illness. What I like to think of is it being a response to a situation in a person's life where they feel trapped, that they have no way of recognizing what they know they can do because they're being blocked for whatever circumstances. It might be the way they look, it might be the way they feel, it might be the way they see, the way they perceive, the way they hear. And there's no reason for people who act or look somewhat different to be isolated and segregated. And it's one of my biggest complaints about the culture that we have. People would not suffer as much for whatever if they were just treated as people. Very simple. And
Facebook.
No.
I don't know if you want me to just talk. I can talk on.
You know what? I do want you. Anything you say would be instructive. But why don't you tell us about what happened to you?
Well, it's a long story. I'll try to simplify it as much as I can. The main part of it was I had a loving family, and life did not meet what I thought it should. I was unhappy. In the lexicon, you could say that I was depressed, that I was anxious, that I felt insecure, but most of it took place below the surface. I didn't reveal what was going on with me. I was able to do whatever I needed to do, but I was essentially unhappy. I went through school. I got my master's degree in psychology. And when I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be drafted because it was the time of the Vietnamese War. So I figured, okay, let me have a good time while I'm waiting to be drafted. So, oh, by the way, I did have a good time, and I started to just do things that I ordinarily wouldn't do, and it freed up my spirit to a certain degree. But I wasn't the person that everybody thought I was before. I was kind of acting strange, which is legitimate, but I was experimenting with what would happen if I didn't sleep for 3 days. Well, what happened was TV would talk to me and different things. I would think I could predict the future. I had all sorts of things going on within me that was not acceptable. So my parents, who I was living with at the time, became alarmed. They called my cousin, who was a psychologist. He said, go take him to a psychiatrist. I had a 5-minute interview with the psychiatrist, and he said, take him to the hospital. Wow. So I was admitted to Newark City Hospital in Newark, New Jersey, which was kind of where people who didn't matter was put. It was a general hospital.
Yeah.
And I was sedated. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in the seclusion room of a mental hospital. So nobody explained anything to me. So I started yelling, what am I doing here? This is not fair. I didn't do anything. Why am I locked up? And within a short period of time, I would get couple of the attendants would come in, and they would inject me with, at that time, it was Thorazine.
All right.
So I was not a good patient. And just a little aside, most of us who work in the field of activism and with mental, psychosocial disabilities recognize that the people who are not compliant patients are treated the worst. However, they are also the people whose spirit is not easily broken. So they're the ones that usually go on and recover and start doing things. But you risk death from the treatments. Good friend.
I'm sorry, what did you say? You risk what?
Death.
Death.
People die from the particular treatment that I had was insulin comas. And that was discontinued. I was probably in the last couple of years before that stopped. And that stopped at about the same time as lobotomies. Wow. So I was lucky in that sense, but they kept raising the Thorazine level for me until they recognized that there was something within me that just kept on complaining. So I would go from yelling, and I never hit anybody. I never did anything physical, but I was what they considered a pain in the ass. So I would in and out of seclusion room, getting a shot back. And then they decided to give me a treatment, which was insulin comas. It's not many people know about this. What it is you're injected with insulin to the point where you go into a coma. And I received 40 of those, 5 days a week for 8 weeks. I received those. And at that time, I thought my spirit was, well, I didn't think anything at the time, but when I look back at it after a number of years, I thought that my spirit had been broken. The way I looked at it was, I used to read comic books when I was a kid and fantasize about being a comic book hero. After the insulin coma treatments, I realized that I could be broken under torture. I wasn't a potential superhero. Everything could be taken away from me, and it was, including my memory. But one of the things I've recognized after I started writing, and it took me a long time to write my book, I admire how quickly you wrote yours, Jeff. Mine took me 25 years.
Mine only took 13. Boy, I was a whiz.
By the way, Dr. Bassman, hold up your book so we know what it looks like.
Can you see it?
Yeah, and read us the title. It's not quite readable.
It's A Fight to Be, and it's a psychologist's experience from both sides of the locked door. There's a picture of a dove flying up in the sky, and it's over the ocean, and it's representative to me of freedom. My son, who was 16 at the time, designed this cover.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Wow.
And how do they get a copy of that?
You can go to my website. It's www.ronaldbassman.com, or if you just put in my name on a Google search, it'll go to my website.
Right, and I understand you get a signed copy if you get one, correct?
Definitely. But also, you can find, I've got probably selected articles on there, probably about 8 to 10 free articles that you can download and read. And, you know, a lot of people don't want to read a whole book, so you can download an article that in essence tells my views.
I have to say, I have been doing that. I've read about 5 of them, and they're fascinating. I would encourage everybody to check Ron's articles.
I think anyone can understand the need for physical accessibility, and blindness people get pretty quickly, and deafness, but psychosocial disabilities, all of us have a misunderstanding, misconception right out of the box. And what Ron is doing is resetting the world's understanding for this condition that impacts, as NIH says, 20% of us. Keep going, Ron.
Well, you know, when you leave a mental hospital, this is back in, for me, the first time I was in a mental hospital as a patient was 1966. It was, I like to say, although it's not a nice thing to say, that I celebrated my 23rd birthday in a mental hospital in seclusion. Mm. And when I was discharged, my memory was shot. I had put on 40 or 50 pounds at the time. All my clothes didn't fit. It was like, I felt like a clown in too small clothes. I had no self-esteem, no memory. And the psychiatrist, upon discharging me, told me and my parents that I would be in and out of mental hospitals for the rest of my life, and I would only be able to work on a low-pressure job. And that was the typical thing that was told to people, and it's not that much different right now. Most people who have been in a hospital will be told that they have to maintain a lower level of stress, regardless if it means doing a menial job. Doesn't mean anything if you have the intelligence or the capacity to do something else.
Yeah.
One of my favorite expressions, in my book, I like to put quotes from different people at the beginning of each chapter. And one of my favorite quotes was written by a medical anthropologist by the name of, I'm blocking on his name, but I'll come back to it. He said that the most difficult thing in life is to be blocked and unable to pursue your potential. And I think that happens to so many people. They're underestimated and segregated, you know, for whatever reasons. And this is really why there's so much misunderstanding about mental illness. In fact, I don't even like to think of it as mental illness. I think the part of the general population that are considered mentally ill, probably 5% generally have some kind of deficiency or some illness. Most people, I've come to learn from working with people for a long time, given the right circumstances, just like Jeff, your brother, if you're in the right atmosphere, you get a chance to blossom. These traits that they said were terrible are no longer, they're no longer applicable. If you're in a kind setting, with a person who understands and can understand your idiosyncrasies, and you know, you form a relationship and that helps you grow. I'd like to tell one story that was meaningful to me. I taught for several years a graduate course in community mental health, and most of the people who were in the course were already working in the field. They were master's level workers. Mm-hmm. And I used to teach the course in a way that very few people taught. I explained that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I've been in and out of the hospital twice. I've been medication or drug free for the last 45 years or more, and never had a problem. Didn't even go to therapy after that. And generally, I found that it was kind of wide eyes, and the students were wide eyed and kind of looked at me as if, well, you're an exception. It's not the rule. So a lot of what I had to teach was to show that there are a lot of people out there that way. The difference is I was open about it. I said who I was and my experience. Most people keep it undercover because it's going to hurt them in whatever they do to announce that they're a former mental patient. But I had the privilege of going to school and getting my PhD in psychology, becoming a licensed psychologist. So I, in a sense, had a union card. So I had I could express my views. So getting back to the classroom, about halfway through the semester, one of the women in the class, she was maybe about her early 40s, said to me, I want to tell you something. In my neighborhood, my next door neighbor is somebody that acts and looks a little strange. I think she may be schizophrenic, and I make it a point never to go out in the backyard to hang up my clothes on the clothesline at the same time that she does with hers. And I've been listening to what you're saying, and I thought, well, maybe I'd try this out. So I went out one day and started up a conversation. We were out at the same time. And she said, I couldn't believe it. She was really interesting. I liked her. We became friends. We started to have coffee and tea a couple of times a week. And that's the issue with the isolation.
Yeah.
And I believe very strongly that the disability community, not the psychiatric, the psychosocial disability community, has come so far in being able to ride buses, to get out in public, to have motorized chairs, that it's no longer kind of odd to see somebody with a disability. It's not that they're not having a harder time possibly than people who don't have an apparent disability. However, they've been offered more opportunities. In the psychiatric community, we're still stuck in this fear and stigma that's prevalent. In my view, that I've come to over many years working with people, my best friends are people who are in various stages of recovery. They're most interesting people to me. Also, people with other kinds of disabilities. They have lived lives. They understand many more things than are ordinarily exposed to people. So what I've come up with, and I've just written something about that, and I have no research to prove this, but I believe that 95% of the people who are treated with what's called serious mental illness, one of the severe diagnoses, are treated the way 5% of the people might need to be contained because they might not be able to control themselves. Okay, so you have 5% of the population that may need special consideration, may need a special kind of containing, special attention, but not the other 90%. They're all treated that way.
Yeah.
Tell us about your executive directorship.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, Ron is executive director of MindFreedom International. And tell us about what that organization is, Ron.
It's an interesting organization in the sense it started in the 80s, the 1980s, by one man and one woman who wanted to do something about the inequities and the poor treatment and the misunderstandings about mental illness. It started out being called Support Coalition, and then it became MindFreedom. And the person who started it, David Oakes, who was a friend of mine and I've known for many years, had an accident around 2012 where he fell off a ladder trying to get his cat off a bookcase, and he became quadriplegic.
Oh my God.
And not worthy of a sigh, because he is the most inspiring man that I know right now. When I took over as executive director about 3 years ago, we started communicating probably about once a week, and he's still working for the organization. Why I say he's inspiring is because whenever I speak to him, maybe once or twice a week, some weeks I skip, I say, "How you doing, David?" He says, "Great." I've never heard him complain, in all this period of time. He's also developed his own website and an organization working on green climate change and greening of the planet. He's doing marvelous work. Now he doesn't have it easy. I know that, I know what he has to go through.
Yeah.
However, he's taken it, and he does a trick now, which is kind of amazing. He takes 2 decks of cards, mixes them together, and he can memorize them quickly and tell one after the other.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was diagnosed with schizophrenia in his early 20s. He had a rough time of it and devoted his life, like many of us who have been through what I would call the chasm, the dark space, and come out on the other side. We are obligated to help others and bring about some light into the lives of people who have suffered. And it's virtually amazing to see how many people can do so much better when they've gotten the right attention. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we live in a culture right now that is not very compassionate.
No.
It's tough. It's tough. And so in MindFreedom, what we're doing right now, I've developed, David started it. It's called The Shield, where we have 300 people signed up for Shields. And when somebody calls our office and complains that they're being involuntarily committed wrongly to a mental hospital, or what's popular now, which is called involuntary outpatient commitment, where somebody could be living at home but is forced to take drugs whether they want them or not. We get the complaints, and what we'll do is we'll contact the people in their region that we may know, or a lawyer, or what we're working on right now is networking with the SILs, the independent living centers. So we're trying to spread this out regionally so that when complaints come in, that we will know somebody in whatever the region is that the person can meet with, that they can advocate for. We had one recently in Minnesota where a young man who was considered to be on the autism spectrum, the high end of it, was being administered electroshock against his will. His mother called up to complain. So we initiated a Shield alert where we have the 300 people. We send them the narrative of what's going on, the picture of the man. His name is Charles. And we write and call the legislature in the state, the governor of the state, the institution where the person is being held, and have what we believe is wrong to happen to this particular person. We also, for this particular one, which has been really hard, a lot of times when we send out one of these alerts, that the psychiatrist or the institution says, okay, let him have his way. It's not worth it. We don't need the publicity. We also write to the newspapers, which are tough to get in. And this one, we had a press release on, and it's still in process. They stopped the electroshock, but they had another commitment hearing on him. And he wants to live with his mother, and his mother wants him to live with her. He's not violent. There's nothing. There was a misunderstanding. Why? I won't get into the details. of why he was committed, and he's being forced to take heavy duty drugs that he doesn't want. He's had some reactions to the drugs. And we've had a psychiatrist who is aligned with us, a psychiatrist in California, wrote an affidavit that he doesn't meet the criteria for commitment. And we continue to work on it. But we have right now, we can't really work on too many at the same time. So we're in the process right now of aligning with ILC SILs who are interested in doing this, and with protection and advocacy lawyers and any pro bono lawyers that we can find, and network them all so we can increase the number of people who we can advocate for their rights. Just as an aside, if you don't know about the newsletter called Mad in America, which you can find very easily by doing a Google search. It's free. I guess about 4 days ago, I wrote an article about what we're trying to do with SHIELD and how to protect rights, and that's on their newsletter. And you can pull it up just by doing a Google search.
What a wonderful name for a program that sounds like it really is the front line, bringing together the existing independent living centers and people who are involved in the law and people who have background in mental health. Congratulations, Ron, really, on your leadership.
We'll make sure, Ron, that in our notes for people to reference later, that they'll know how to contact you and contact those organizations that you've talked about.
Yeah, if anybody who wants to get in contact with me personally, I always respond to whatever emails or letters I get. You can write to me. If you go on my website, there's a way to write to me.
Contact you.
Fantastic.
Right.
That's fantastic.
There's a lot to be done. One of the things that is probably happened because of the COVID, that for much of the work that I've been doing, I've been trying to engage with people across disability, because we have the same issues, that with the proper support, we all should be able to live in community. And very few people that can't be in community with support, who can't have informed consent about what their choices are, if they have people they trust who they can rely on, if they can't understand all the ramifications of treatment. But they should be the ones that should choose who their trusted people are.
Yes.
Now, because of the COVID, because of all the people who have died in institutions and generally in congregate living spaces, there's a bridge between the typical things we talk about as disabilities and the psychosocial disabilities. It's a bit complicated, but what we've been trying to do is we started a monthly seminar that's called Judy's Room, named after Judy Chamberlain, who was one of the pioneers in, let's call it the Mad Rights movement. And we do that once a month, and we have people from all cross disabilities, also with MindFreedom members. And we do a talk for about an hour. We have people talking, and then we have an hour and sometimes longer question and answer. The first one we had was to create understanding, which was what is mental illness and what it's not. Then we had one with 3 experts on psychiatric drugs talking about what happens to you when you take psychiatric drugs and how to withdraw in a sensible fashion.
Yeah.
Sorry. Then we also had one on SHIELD, what we were trying to do with that. We had one on how do you protect your rights and how you get to be in community, to get the supports that you need for community. And what they are is showing the common interests between the different disabilities, so they're not in silos. Because there's been a lot of misunderstanding about associating, let's say, with psychosocial disabilities, that we don't want that. But right now, because of the urgency of what's happened, there's much more receptivity. So we're in the process of developing this. We're going to be having a strategy meeting. We have 6 SIL directors who want to be involved, and we'll be expanding that. And then we'll be meeting with groups of lawyers and doing that. This is a project that I'm really excited about. If we can get going well, it will have the potential to help people who are being abused. I don't know what other way I could put it.
Well, Ron, this show is archived, and I'm sure that your words are going to reach a lot of people over time. And we appreciate you coming on and helping us all understand, and help us all understand that there are shields available for those who need our help.
Thank you so much, Ron. And like I said, we'll make sure your information is on our notes so people can get in touch with you easily.
Sounds like you could be reached pretty readily.
Yeah, I'm easy to reach, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm all over the internet. With my name in.
Well, we could continue, but we need to go.
I appreciate it. I know that I can go. There's so much to talk about, just as when you're talking about your work and your experience.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing, both of you.
And thank you too, Ron. We'll talk to you again.
We'll talk to you soon.
Hope so. Hope we get together soon.
When we travel, we'll be your way. We'll stop and have food together.
Please do.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to move on to our section called
Instrument Corner. Get down the box.
Instrument Corner.
Okay. So, do you want this on your lap, or do you want me to hold it?
Oh, won't you hold it?
Okay.
Okay. Ocarinas are clay whistles, or really made of any materials, and I'm going to tell you a little more about how I came upon so many of them. But Christy, why don't you read us what Richard and Sandy Schmidt wrote in their little booklet about the history of ocarinas.
Well, tell us who they were first.
Richard and Sandy Schmidt had an organization called Claziness Whistle Works in Bellingham, Washington, and I met them by virtue of their instruments and became friends, and I'll tell you more about them with every instrument. But Richard died a few years ago, and Sandy has hit a rough patch. We're trying to get a hold of her, but yeah.
We're certainly in gratitude toward what they've given to the world of music. And when I found out, they have a little book that they gave out called Songbook. I'm going to hold it up here for a minute. And inside was a little bit of the history of the instrument, which is just fascinating. It's one of the oldest instruments known to the world. Excuse me. It's a closed vessel flute, and it has whistle holes, and you play it, as you can kind of see Jeff doing there on this. This is one of the biggest ocarinas that he has.
The very biggest.
The very biggest. Some of the earliest types were 7,000 years old, and they were carved from bone, and they were from the northern provinces of China. But even earlier than that, in Central Africa, they have found clay whistles over 30,000 years old. Now, the word ocarina actually is an Italian word, and it translates to sweet little goose. And they're fascinating. Jeff has how many? I don't even know now.
Oh, 30 or more.
Okay, so do you want to talk about your big one there?
Yeah, this is the largest that Richard and Sandy made, and I traded them some of my materials for schools for their daughter who was a teacher, and in exchange for that giant ocarina.
Okay,
But
and then I'm going to hand you the box of
Okay,
other ones.
I'll
and you
trade
hand me
you.
that big boy there.
Yeah.
Take
Okay.
that. And then I'm going to orient this box the way you remembered you put things in it.
Okay.
there
So
you go.
ocarinas are of two types: those that are instruments and those that are decorative. And I've been given many ocarinas that are purely decorative. For example, this guy that looks like a shark, almost worthless as an instrument. You can blow a couple notes, but it's something that's very interesting to look at. Another one, for example, are this one that's a Mayan sun. And these come from Mexico, Central America, Peru, South America. There are so many different types of ocarinas
Get
that
your
people
parrot
buy, thinking that they're going to be able to play beautiful instrument music, like this here parrot. But, however,
They're very difficult to play.
they're virtually impossible, useless. Here are two that were bought at Lake Titicaca by a friend of mine named Achim Van Claveren on a trip. And again, he thought they'd be great instruments. That giant didgeridoo I played a time or two ago, that was also from that trip of Van's. Now,
why don't you get into some that you can play?
I will. Now that we're through showing you the ones that I can't, that are not playable.
Get your sweet potato over there.
Yeah, this is the most common. It's called a sweet potato, and because it looks sort of like a sweet potato. Another one from Richard and Sandy. I'm missing a hole. You can make some sweet music with these, and
Now you have a favorite one in there, I think.
I do, but I want to show you the first one that I got from them is this little fish whistle, it's called, and I bought it at the Pike Place Market in Seattle, and wonderful little instrument, and I fell in love with them and their work. I later got this one from them. And then I had one that was a favorite, and a chip got stuck in the mouthpiece. I sent it to them for repair, and they lost it. And in exchange, they sent me this one, which is my favorite of all times.
And tell us what you
It's
did with that.
absolutely tiny. Well, I have played this. Oh, I know. We were on a cruise celebrating Christy's uncle's 100th birthday. And because of my disabilities and Christy's proclivities, we didn't go in any of the ports of call. We stayed in the boat. And at one of them, I think it was Puerto Vallarta,
I think it was.
we were on the top deck, about 2 miles from shore, and we could hear, across the clarity and silence of the water, a mariachi band. Wonderful. They stopped playing, and I played. I played some fast-paced something. They were silent. They could hear it in town. On the shore. This is so loud. I've played this. One time I played. Oh, by the way, so I played. Then they played. Then I played, and we did a concert together. And they had no idea where the music was coming from. Later, someone on the ship said, "Oh, it was you playing. We were on the shore. We had no idea where that was coming from." I've played this in many, many places, and people stop. One time there was a tree full of birds. I played it. All the birds stopped. I played it again. Most of them stopped. A few kept. It's just that guy with that whistle, and it went.
Now, is this the one that was made for the
Yes.
children?
The
Tell that
story, and this is the last thing we'll say about ocarinas, is that this was made for the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. A gentleman contracted for them to make 250. He wanted a tiny instrument that children could learn to play readily, that children, the homeless children in Rio, because of AIDS, were being disappeared by the police because the world was coming to Rio for the Earth Summit. So he wanted to give children a way they could signal to each other, and he also wanted to teach them to play so they could open and close the Earth Summit with a song he wrote. 60 urchins from the street sang, and 60 played his ocarinas. He passed them out to everybody, taught all the kids to play them, and I got one of the only ones that they had left. So this is a prized possession if there ever was one. So we are grateful to all people who make music, all people who make instruments, and all people who make each other's lives better by lifting our spirits, by protecting us, and by giving freely of themselves, like Ron Bassman. Next,
are you going to close with a song?
Yes, we're going to close with a song that'll run under the credits called To Hell and Back, that I wrote for what's the term? A documentary that I did, an audio documentary, and it was turned into a video documentary. I wrote this song as a theme song for it. It's called To Hell and Back, and Ron and I agree that it perfectly addresses both people who have been institutionalized due to cognitive disabilities and psychosocial disabilities, whatever we choose to call them, that we don't have any simple language, as you've heard. On our next show, our Father's Day show, we're going to have a special guest,
great.
Another man who gives freely of himself to the world and to his family, and we'll talk about his contribution to the arts, to inclusion, and to the betterment of all of us. So thank you, Ron, and all of you who make a difference, thank you, because you find that when you give to others, when you provide a shield so that others are safe to be themselves, when we stop devaluing people because of their differences, we find that all of us experience peace, sweet peace.